On September 11, 2001, 19 people, who had spent a total of about $500,000 on preparations, set in motion a chain of events that cost the world $3 trillion in direct military expenditures, claimed the lives of more than 900,000 people in the ensuing wars, and reshaped international politics for 2 decades to come. In 102 minutes, nearly 3,000 people died, and the 2 most recognizable buildings on the planet collapsed. These were not victims of a natural disaster, nor an accident, nor a war in the conventional sense, but a planned attack within the country. The United States, the country with the largest military budget in history, found itself helpless in the face of 19 people. Before the catastrophe. In 1996, Osama bin Laden issued an official statement declaring war on the United States. The document was titled The Declaration of Jihad, and it described in detail why the American military presence on the Arabian Peninsula was, for him, sufficient grounds to launch organized violence. But the reaction to it in Washington was as if it were merely the rhetoric of yet another extremist. 2 years later, in August 1998, bombings occurred at the U.S. embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, killing 224 people and injuring more than 4,000. And it then became clear that Al-Qaeda was not some abstract concept, but a functioning organization with its own logistics, finances, and operatives in various countries around the world. The CIA began to monitor its activities more closely, but within the intelligence community, the standard bureaucratic disease persisted. The FBI and the CIA did not share information with each other. There was rivalry between the agencies, and data on suspicious activity ended up in files that no one compiled into a coherent picture. In the summer of 2001, the warnings grew more alarming. In July, FBI Director Robert Mueller received a report from an agent in Phoenix stating that a suspiciously large number of young men from the Middle East were undergoing flight training at American schools. The memo was set aside. In August, another FBI agent detained Zakaria Moussaoui in Minneapolis, who wanted to learn to fly a Boeing 747 without having any reason to do so, and the agent wrote to his superiors that this man was capable of crashing a plane into the World Trade Center towers. Those were his exact words, and he too was ignored. On August 6, 2001, President Bush was on vacation at his ranch in Texas, where he received an intelligence briefing titled, "Bin Laden Intends to Strike Within the U.S." The document mentioned threats of hijackings and possible attacks on New York. Disaster. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the weather in the northeastern United States was perfect. The sky was completely clear, visibility was nearly unlimited, the temperature was around 65 degrees, the plane was perfectly visible against the clear sky, and the pilot could see everything. At 7:59 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 departed from Logan Airport in Boston with 92 people on board, including 5 hijackers led by Mohammed Atta. He was the leader of the entire operation, of Egyptian origin, educated in architecture in Hamburg, a meticulous and methodical man with a hatred for Western culture that, judging by his diaries, had taken shape as early as his student years. At 8:14 a.m., the plane stopped responding to air traffic controllers' requests. The hijackers had seized the cockpit and turned off the transponder, but the controllers could still hear sounds from the cockpit because someone had accidentally pressed the intercom button, and Atta's voice came over the intercom, telling the passengers, "Nobody move, please. We're returning to the airport." The air traffic controllers realized a hijacking was taking place, but the military had not been notified. At 8:46 a.m., Flight AA-11, traveling at a speed of approximately 740 kilometers per hour, crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center between the 93rd and 99th floors. The impact was so precise that it blocked all evacuation routes for people above. At the moment of impact, the plane was carrying about 20,000 liters of jet fuel, which instantly ignited and spread across several floors. About 17,000 people were working in the North Tower at that moment. At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower between the 77th and 85th floors. At that moment, dozens of television cameras were already broadcasting live footage of the building. The impact was visible to the entire world in real time, and this instantly dispelled all doubts. It was not an accident. The South Tower burned differently. The angle of impact was such that the structural damage was asymmetrical. The load was redistributed unevenly, and that is precisely why the South Tower, which the plane struck 17 minutes later, collapsed first. At 9:59 a.m., 56 minutes after the impact, it fell in 10 seconds at freefall speed, creating a cloud of dust and debris that blanketed several blocks of Lower Manhattan. While the towers were burning, two other events took place that are often forgotten in the chaos of those first few hours. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the west wing of the Pentagon in Washington. A building considered one of the most heavily guarded on the planet was attacked by a commercial airliner. 184 people were killed. The fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, departed Newark 42 minutes late, and that delay may have saved hundreds of lives. By the time the hijackers took control, the passengers had already called their relatives from aboard and learned what had happened to the other three planes. They voted, decided to act, and stormed the cockpit. The plane crashed in a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at 10:03 a.m. Apparently, the target was the Capitol, or the White House. The North Tower collapsed at 10:28 a.m. It had stood for 102 minutes. Among the dead were 343 firefighters from the New York Fire Department, 23 police officers, and 37 Port Authority officers, the largest single-day loss of life among emergency personnel in U.S. history. A total of 2,977 people died that day. Citizens of 93 countries, not a single one of them was a Russian citizen, but people from India, Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, the Dominican Republic, and dozens of other countries perished. The World Trade Center was truly global. Many international financial companies operated there. A separate story involves the people who jumped from the towers. There were at least 200 of them. This was not acknowledged in official U.S. documents for a long time because, under the laws of several states, suicide did not entitle one to insurance payouts. It was not until 2011 that a New York medical examiner officially recognized that these people died as a result of the terrorist attack, not of their own volition. They were simply left with no choice. After the disaster, the debris continued to burn for another 99 days after the collapse. There were pockets of intense heat beneath the rubble, with temperatures reaching 600 degrees. Rescuers working at the disaster site in the first few weeks breathed air saturated with asbestos, lead, dioxins, and hundreds of other toxic substances. They were told the air was safe. That was a lie. To date, more people have died from illnesses related to working at Ground Zero than perished on September 11th itself. It was only in 2010 that the U.S. passed the James Zarog Law, which required the federal government to pay for the medical treatment of rescue workers. On October 7, 2001, the U.S. launched a military operation in Afghanistan. The official goal was to destroy al-Qaeda and overthrow the Taliban regime that was harboring it. The operation became the longest war in American history. The last American soldiers left Afghanistan in August 2021, exactly 20 years later. By that point, approximately 2,400 American service members, more than 3,500 NATO allies, tens of thousands of Afghan military and police personnel, and, according to various estimates, between 40,000 and 70,000 civilians had been killed. In October 2001, the Patriot Act was passed, a law that expanded the intelligence agency's powers to surveil citizens to such an extent that its critics compared it to legislation that the U.S. itself had condemned in other countries. The NSA gained the right to wiretap phone calls without a court order, track financial transactions, and access library data on citizens' reading habits. In 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq. Officially, this was justified by Saddam Hussein's possession of weapons of mass destruction and alleged ties to al-Qaeda. Neither of these was found. The 9/11 Commission explicitly stated that no credible evidence of a link between Iraq and the attacks existed. The war officially lasted until 2011, and its consequences, regional instability, the emergence of ISIS, and a humanitarian catastrophe, are still felt to this day. Osama bin Laden was found and killed on May 2, 2011, in the Pakistani city of Abbottabad, in a house 800 meters from the country's military academy, where he had lived for several years. Conclusion: September 11th changed not only American politics, it changed the very fabric of everyday life. taking off shoes at airports, biometric data at entry points, total video surveillance in public places, algorithms for tracking suspicious online activity. All of this is a direct consequence of that morning. After 2001, architects began designing skyscrapers with fundamentally different evacuation protocols and structural resilience. About 25,000 people survived in the towers and were able to evacuate. Most of those who were below the point of impact managed to get out. The story of their rescue is just as important as the story of the deaths, but it is much less often the focus of attention. 3,000 people died in 102 minutes, but the consequences of those 102 minutes continue to this day.